Evening, gents. Here are the three sticks that are kind of out and about right now of note, at least the one that I have, so I figured I'd do a quick little comparison. We have the Warthog, of course, the VKB Gunfighter Pro, and the Virpil T50 Mongoose CM2. I guess first we'll just start about talking some of the big picture characteristics. I forget exactly what I paid for the Hog, but I mean, you guys already know what's up with that. The Gunfighter I got for $4.97, and I'll put all these up on screen. Hopefully I'll just run through them real quick so you can pause it and get all the information you want. But the VKB I got for $4.97, and the Mongoose I got for $350. The extension for it, I got the 100 mil extension, and it was $27. As far as shipping and availability, that kind of stuff goes, the Hog you can get anywhere, obviously. Get off of Amazon, get it pretty quick. Both for the VKB and the Virpil, I forget where the VKB is made, but it's somewhere over there, like old Soviet Union bloc kind of countries. The Virpil's in Belarus, actually. Does it say in the bottom? No, it doesn't say. I don't remember, but it's somewhere over there. So anyway, shipping can be a little bit of an issue. For the Gunfighter, it took 10 business days for it to ship, and I ordered it on Christmas Eve. So I ordered it the 24th, and it shipped on the 4th. I think it took like 3 to 5 days for it to get here, and that's going to be the same for the Virpil too. The actual shipping was only a couple of days, like a week's time or so. The Virpil I ordered on 23 August, and it shipped 9 September, which is 12 business days. So it's not really the fastest thing. I have to assume it has to do with going through customs and stuff like that, but I don't really know. The other big issue with these two is availability. These guys are pretty much restocking like once a month, it seems like, and they're gone within like a day's time. You've seen my posts on the forums about it, but they go pretty quick. And as far as I know, it's pretty much the same thing for the VKB offering. They both availability and stocking and all that kind of stuff. They're relatively new companies, and they just haven't upscaled enough, I guess, to make it quick. So that's an issue. Go over some basic stats on these as well. The Hog is 7 pounds, 8.2 ounces, and it stands 11 inches tall from the base to the tip. VKB is 2 pounds, 12.4 ounces, and also 11 inches. And the VPC is 3 pounds, 2.4 ounces, and it stands 14.5 inches tall. So that's basically the biggest defining characteristic of this guy, is he's a lot taller, and you can see it right now in the picture. It's pretty drastic. So these you can obviously get away with doing desktop kind of mounting situation. This one, it would be pretty difficult because your arm would be way up here, and it's just not, it's not really conducive to that. So that's something to keep in mind. As well, on that topic, the Hog, most of you will probably know that the base plate is really heavy, and that's evidenced by the weight. The thing's 7 pounds as opposed to 2 pounds. So that works well on a desktop. That in combination with the mechanism works well because it's a constant amount of force. And so when you hit that hard stop, you know that that's as much force as you need to put. This one, because it's got increased resistance through the throw, and because this plate is just a thin piece of aluminum, it will tip pretty easily as you're putting more and more force on it. So this one as well, like, you can do it desktop, but I would recommend you clamp it down or something if that's what you're planning on doing. For me, all of these, they didn't live in this configuration. I took them off the bases, and I've got them mounted over to my chair in a center stick kind of setup. But the Virpil, for sure, you're going to have some sort of different mounting solution because they don't even offer a base plate as far as I'm aware at this point, anyway. So another thing to consider with all these is, I know there's some guys that are making extensions for the Hog. I haven't looked into any of those because it was never really a thing for me. With the VKB, I think I got this separate. It came in the same package, like they've got a spot for it in the box that it ships with, but it doesn't by default come with it. It's a separate purchase that you have to get, but I don't really remember what the price was on it or whatever. And I may be talking out of my ass here on this. I don't really remember, but I never used this anyway. One nice thing though is it's the curved kind of setup, so that should make it easier for certain mounting situations around chairs and stuff like that. But it is proprietary, so you won't be able to get an extension from anybody else except from VKB. This is pretty much your only option. The Virpil, like I said, I got a 100mm extension, and it'll fit on, because it uses the same mounting solution as the Hog, it'll work on either of those setups. So that's kind of nice. They're relatively inexpensive, and it's good quality. The threading is good. I haven't seen any issues with it, so it's a decent purchase. Okay, so those are the big things. Let's, I guess, zoom in and look at them one by one. Okay, so here's the Hog. You're all familiar with it probably. I'm just going to go through and show the relative motion and move the buttons and stuff to get like a reference of what things sound like and feel like, and I'll talk about what I see here. First of all, it's worth mentioning mine when I got it way back when the gimbal had that stiction issue. So I've taken this thing apart many times and sanded down the plastic gimbal and then put on better grease on it to try to get it so that it felt a lot smoother. And at this point, after the work and using it for so many years, it's fairly nice, but you can still hear the scraping because it's just plastic on plastic. So that's the type of mechanism you're getting with this, which is my biggest complaint. The good thing about this mechanism though, the force required to move it in a certain direction doesn't increase over the throw, it's just constant. So same amount of force all the way to the stop. And that's in, of course, any direction. But the centering detent is really big. So if you want to do any fine movements, it becomes a little bit more difficult. As well, my other complaint with the Hog is that you get some rotation slop here. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it moves quite a bit. In hand, it's very noticeable, and it's not a big deal. It just is annoying. Never liked it. Aside from that, the buttons are very nice feeling. After lots of abuse, they still work and feel good. They're fine. The trigger, I don't like the second stage of the trigger. First stage is nice, real crisp, real easy, but the second stage, it's a little bit mushy, and it never really felt quite right to me. That being said, it's just a feeling thing. It's always worked fine. Hopefully the camera's picking that up, the sound of the second detent. One thing I will say about the Hog is that the metal housing of the grip and the quality of the switches and buttons and stuff is real good. I almost have no complaints. Other complaint I had is I used the paddle here as a shift modification basically in DCS so that you know, I can hold this down and push a button and it does something different than when it's not held down. The problem with that though is this thing always squeaked on me, and I think I got it so that it doesn't squeak as much, but every once in a while it'll come back and it'll just do a weird squeaking noise as you move it. Once again, not a big deal, just kind of annoying. Not actually doing it right now, but just take my word for it. One other thing of note with this though is even though it is a metal you know, casting or whatever they did for it, mine actually broke at the base. Right where you can see kind of that wavy black line, that's JB Weld, because I was just moving it around and lightly tapped it against the base of my chair, and it just shattered right there. It just broke clean in two. So I had to JB Weld it back together, which is kind of weird. So even though it's metal, it's you know, it's not like the highest quality or anything like that. And it can be damaged. I was pretty shocked when it happened, actually. But JB Weld, and it works fine again. But once again, it could have been a lot worse. Could have broken the wires and all that kind of stuff. And Thrustmaster, in my experience, have not been overly helpful with repairs, things like that. So that's just something to note. Okay, now on to the VKB Gunfighter Pro. This was the second stick that I got. I should mention, in between the Hog, I did get the Virpil T50 CM base to use with my Warthog grip, and I was using that for a little bit. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this was actually the second thing I got. This is the third. So with the VKB, notable things is it uses a different mechanism. It uses cams and springs. So what that means in effect is it feels real smooth, especially around the center position. However, it requires more and more force to get to the stops. That said, even with a little bit of throw here, I don't remember what the deflection is. That's the other thing about these, both this one and the Virpil. They don't deflect as much as the Warthog does. Warthog has a little bit more of a throw, which is another actual big thing as far as feel goes. But I never noticed it to be a problem. You do it once and you're like, oh, I don't have to move the stick as much as I used to, and then your brain immediately compensates for it, so it's not a big deal. I much prefer this than I do the Warthog, which is why I got these instead of the Warthog. That plastic gimbal, it just has always driven me nuts, and the lack of fine control around the detent was just very annoying. So that's something that's good about this one. Around the center, it's very smooth. You can do a lot of fine corrections. Other things, it's got a ton of buttons, hats. It's great. I got this one instead of the Virpil offering at the time because the Virpil one didn't have as many hats as this, but we'll talk about it in a minute. Virpil did fix that in this generation of things. So let's see, you got a 4-way here where your CMS is, straight buttons, another 5-way, so 4-way plus push. This one's a push as well, so it's a 5-way. This is a mini stick, a complete mini stick. It's not an 8-way hat. This as well is a mini stick. It's not a 8-way or 4-way hat. And then over on this side, you've got your 5-way hat. And then of course you have a brake lever and a flip-up trigger and a dual stage regular trigger. And this is real nice actually. This on the VKB, this flip-up trigger and this lever, they're both metal, and they have real nice actions. They really did a good job with these. That's definitely one benefit on this one. However, my big complaint with this, and why I actually went with a Virpil just recently, is I thought that this would be a big selling point. The fact that it has this mini stick for, you know, thinking for like slew and stuff, because I got this before I got the upgrade mod. I'll talk about the throttles in a little bit, but I got an upgrade, the slew control upgrade for the Hog throttle, which is excellent. It's great. But before that, I just had the nub like everybody else, and I was like, well, this would be very nice, a lot smoother, a lot easier control. And to a large extent, that's true. However, I never ended up needing to use it because I actually got the upgrade to the Hog. The other big thing I thought was going to be a big selling point was this, that it was a mini stick as well. This has a special function where it operates in one way, and then if you press in and hold down for a few seconds, then it functions in a different way. Now in theory that opens up a lot of options and it's good for certain types of trim and stuff like that. However, in practice, to make this thing work like a button, as soon as you move it the slightest short and curly, it actuates. So instead of a normal trim where it's defined clicks and then you can hold it, you know, if you want to run the trimmer longer, there's no feedback. You just breathe on it in any direction and it activates, and then it continues to activate. That is a huge annoyance, at least it was for me, for most things. In some applications, if you wanted to set like kilo, you know, stick position trimmers and stuff like that, it would probably work a lot better. I don't fly those that much, and I always just use a regular trim anyway, so it ended up not being a big selling point. It ended up being a big pain in my ass. And that's why I went with the other one just recently. The other frustrating thing is the software for this. It gives you a lot of control. However, it's not easy to use, and I was never able to overcome this particular issue. And I know Grits has this stick too, and we've talked about it now and again, and he's not very happy. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but as far as I understand, he's not very happy with the way that trimmer works either. Now, if it was a different function on the stick, it probably wouldn't be that big a deal, but trim is arguably the most important, you know, function that you have on your stick. So it was big enough annoyance that I wanted to shell out another $500 or whatever it was for the other stick, and just put it that way. That said, it's very comfortable. It's a very comfortable stick. And one thing I like a lot about it is that, and this is not really necessarily for this stick, but just the Russian model of stick that this is built off of, your thumb has a place to rest. You get a natural grip, and your thumb can rest here without actuating your CMS hat, as opposed to the Hog, which you don't have any place for your thumb. So you either have to rest it on the switch, which, you know, if you get all sweaty and, you know, tensed up and stuff, you can actuate it, or you end up putting your thumb up here, which is what I usually do. And it's okay. It's something that you don't even think about it after a while. But once you have a place on the stick where you can comfortably rest your thumb, it then becomes very noticeable, and you're like, yeah, that was really annoying, and I don't want to have to deal with this particular thing anymore, you know. So that is a nice thing. It's very comfortable as far as that goes. One drawback is the size of the head, giggity, is so big that, like, moving your thumb around from that position to the other positions, you can see even here, it ends up actuating the mini stick there. And it's not comfortable. You're just straining your thumb the whole time to get around. So sometimes you'll end up just flying like this anyway, because you don't want to have the hassle of moving your thumb back up and around like that all the time. As far as ergonomics go, with the rest here, this is adjustable. You can, but it's on a pivot point here, so loosen that screw, and then you can rotate this up a little bit or down to get a good resting position for your hand. Works fine, works good. It's real solid. Don't really have any complaints. I think Virpil did it better because their offering doesn't work on a rotation. It works on a straight vertical lift. So this angle doesn't matter as much. That said, they've got this rounded over, so as you're rotating it up and down, you kind of still have the same curve, so it's really not that big of a deal. It's pretty okay. No complaints. Other thing for the VKB here is the reason why the base is so small is because I've got a lot of the magic fairy dust in this little black box thing. So you have to plug into this, and then you have to mount this somewhere, and then this goes into the computer. This other port here is for auxiliary if you wanted to tap into something else like rudder pedals or something like that. So it's got a little bit of functionality on it, but it is a separate piece that you have to figure out a place for. You can either just, you know, rest it on your desk or mount it somewhere or whatever, but just something to be aware of. Aside from that, I'm going to try to get the sound of the buttons and describe the way that they feel. I already talked about the mini sticks, which of course I don't like. Aside from that, the buttons are fairly nice. The straight buttons are fine. They're nice and clicky. Immediate activation. You won't accidentally activate them. They've got a nice response to them. However, one thing I don't like, and it might be hard to show here, is they wiggle around a little bit, ever so slightly, which makes them feel a little bit cheaper. It's not an issue of functionality, like I said, but it is something to note. It adds a little bit of, you know, cheapness feeling to the thing. I have no doubt that the buttons are of good quality and they'll last for, you know, millions of activations. No problem there. It's just they feel a little bit, you know, chintzy when it's compared to like the Warthog buttons. And let's see if I can get some audio here. Comparison. So they've got less throw and they're more clicky. I like that they have less throw actually, but they are a lot louder sounding than the Warthog. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this is a metal housing though, and it just deadens the sound better than this plastic housing. But yeah, that's the comparison there. Another thing is the hats on this, and this will be the same for the Virpil as well, but the hats, they feel nice and very defined. The throw isn't as much as it is on the hats on the Warthog. But aside from that, good quality, don't have any complaints. I haven't accidentally actuated one when I didn't mean to. It's just a slightly different feel. Also, one thing to note is the pinky button position on the VKB is really nice. It actually is right underneath this finger and not the pinky, which I like a lot because it was much more comfortable for me. I used, in this one, this pinky button as my modifier, and it's just real comfortable, real easy to get to. I don't ever actuate it without meaning to, you know, it's good. I like it. The Hog is more on the pinky, and never had an issue activating that either. It's pretty good. But it's just a slightly different position. That one's pinky, and this one's this finger. So yeah, overall it feels real nice. In general, because it's plastic and not metal, it will react to the heat of your hand, and so it warms up a little bit. And it was actually a little odd to get used to at first because I'm used to the Warthog, you know, it being cool, staying cool basically all the time, which is nice. This will warm up in your hand, but you also get more grip on this one. It's texturized better. There's a pretty aggressive stippling on the side and stuff, whereas on the Hog it's totally smooth. So that's going to be down to preference, I guess, but it's something to mention, something to note. Okay, can't think of anything else off the top of my head of this, so we'll go over to the Virpil offering. Okay, so the Virpil, the VPC, this is the Mongoose T50 CM2. The original one, the CM, I didn't get at the time. I got the VKB instead because it just didn't have as many hats and things. Some of the hats were only buttons. Other of the hats were only 2-way as opposed to 4-way, 5-way, so I never ended up going with it. Plus it didn't have the mini sticks, which like I already said, I thought was going to be a benefit, but ended up being a pain in my ass. So general layout is going to be the same look as the VKB, still the Russian style. This one has 8-way hats here and here as opposed to the mini sticks. And the pinky button is down on the pinky again. And this honestly is the least comfortable of the three, but as you can see, my pinky's kind of resting on just the top part of the button, but I have no problem actuating it. It's not a big deal, it's just doesn't feel as comfortable as the other ones. Aside from that, differences between this and the VKB as far as the triggers go. The flip up trigger on this one, not nearly as nice as on the VKB. Now I don't generally use these for anything anyway. On a few of the airplanes I use it as the master arm, where you flip it up and master arm's on, flip it down, master arm off. But it is something to note. It's plastic, as well as the brake lever on this are plastic as opposed to metal, so they don't feel as nice. As well, the travel, when you have it in the down position and you're using it as a trigger, the activation point is not well defined. It doesn't feel as good, but it works fine. One thing I will say is that the way that they have the trigger and brake lever contoured so that they face your finger is very nice. It's much nicer than on the VKB offering. The only problem, the only complaint I have is the brake lever, because it's plastic and there's a long lever arm there. You get to the max throw and then there's still flex because it's plastic. In practice, it's very sensitive in game as an axis, so you'll never even find yourself going to the full stop. So it's not an issue, but it is something to take note of. Big thing right out of the gate is the size, like I said. So if you have a mounting solution for something else, you may need to change that for this because it's a lot taller. They also make a Warbird base. I don't have any experience with that. I think that one's shorter and it's meant to be more of a desktop type mount, so you might want to look into that. And I think somebody else in the squadron, I don't want to say who, is getting that, so maybe they can chime in at some point. It's the same kind of cam and spring system, and they give you cams. I don't know if I talked about that with the VKB, but this is the bag of goodies for the VKB. A whole ton of stuff. And the Virpil, this one, comes with lots of different cam profiles and 3 options of springs. And it also comes with, actually this is for the throttle. Talked about this in a minute. So yeah, everything functions the same except for those caveats. The hats for the trim and the slew sensor, real nice and clicky, not hard to move, distinct zones. I got no complaint. Like it a lot. Trim on this is just light years better than on the VKB, so I'm real happy with it. Another thing that I like better is the buttons. They feel better. They don't have that weird chintzy, like they kind of slide around in their socket kind of feel. Same amount of throw, same amount of clickiness. Real responsive, real nice feeling, and they don't have any of the slop going around there. One thing I will mention as a comparison is even though they're the same style, the head sizes are much different. Hopefully you can see that there, but the VKB, the head of it is way bigger than on the Virpil. And like I said, that kind of stretches your thumb out. You don't really have that problem on the VPC, on the Virpil. It's a much more compact head and easier to get to things, and moving your thumb like that isn't nearly as stressful. The ledge for your thumb here isn't quite as high as on the VKB, but it still has a nice place to rest here. It'll just be bumping up against the CMS hat a little bit. The profile on the hats, the 5-way hats, I like a lot better on this stick as well, on the Virpil. Just the profile and the way that their wings are shaped makes it easier to actuate them. One thing that is a little bit worse on this is because the head is smaller, everything's a little bit closer together. This particular hat right here, this 5-way, if you're trying to go down on it, your thumb is hitting the trim hat as well. Not a big deal. I've never accidentally actuated it, but it's just something to note that it might feel a little bit cramped at first until you get used to it. The rest adjustment on this is a little wheel that will just raise and lower the whole platform level. Real nice, no complaints. The stick overall is a little bit smaller as far as the grip goes. The overall construction and height is bigger, but the actual, real estate where your hand's going to be is a little bit smaller. So for me, I just leave that at the lowest position, and it's comfortable, real fine. I would say I've got medium-large hands, small side of large, so that's pretty normal. Oh, one other thing though, one complaint is when the trigger, the flip down trigger is in the down position, there's really no room for your finger. As your finger is naturally resting on this, let's go around this way, might be a little bit better. It butts up against that little notch there, which sucks. It's uncomfortable. Not a huge deal, but it's an annoyance. So like I said, I always fly with it up like that because I don't use it for anything anyway. Also something to know. In general, it seems like this was just made for smaller hands than the VKB offering. As far as the mechanism goes and the throw, just like on the VKB, real nice and smooth around the center. It'll come back. It is a little bit springy. VKB has that problem too, as opposed to the Warthog because of that huge center detent. But you get used to it real quick, and you get a lot more control this way. I much prefer this as than I do to the Warthog. One thing I will say is at the max deflection, there's a weird little hump on mine. I don't know if you can see that. It's a little bit, just takes a little bit more. It's not a jarring thing, but there is a noticeable range where you get about this much normal, and then you try to go a little bit further to the max deflection, and it's a little bit different feeling. Not a big deal, but that's the way it feels. Now, out of all the three, this is the one I like, for all the reasons talked about, good and bad. Okay, let's start talking about the throttles. Okay, back with the throttles. We got the Hog and the Mongoose T50CM. Let's get their dimensions out of the way here. Warthog is 9 pounds 3 ounces. VPC is 7 pounds. They use the same mounting holes, which is really smart on VPC's behalf there. So anything that you have this mounted to, this should be able to just mount in as well, as long as it's a surface mount. Dimensions of the boxes are going to be a little bit different. Let me see. This is 6 5/8, and this is 5 15/16, almost 16 inches, and about 9.5. So VPC is just a little bit wider. But like I said, same mounting hole, so that was a nice feature. This is the third version of their throttle. There's some reviews out there about the initial offerings. There was one, and you can tell by the difference in the handles. These the first ones looked much more like this kind of style, where it was just a uniform kind of roundness. There was a first version, and then with feedback, like almost initially, they came out with a second version, changed a couple of the buttons or something on the throttle handles themselves, and then this is the third version where they upgraded quite a few things. But they did downgrade 2 things, which I'll talk about in a minute. Functionality wise, basically same. except that the VPC has way more options, way more buttons, way more axes, all that kind of stuff. So I guess we'll just go into it. You're probably familiar with the Hog already, so I won't really talk about it. Additional features on the VPC are these rotaries. They're a big standout here. These two are analog, so it's a specific 0 to 100 with a 50 detent. Real nice detent in the middle. These are constant rotary encoders with pushes. So each of them has a button, but then they have individual clicks for the rotary, and you can just keep spinning it in whatever direction you want, and then each one of those little clicks will basically activate a virtual button. So they kind of work the same way, but you can make them do slightly different things. This is an option that I haven't really looked into too much, this 5-way mode rotary. By default, when it comes, all it does is change the color layout of the things. But I know that you can go in and you can make this a different modifier, so that these would be in essence 5 different profiles. So, you know, just as an example, put 1 for your like A10 profile, 2 for your Mirage profile or something, and you can bind the buttons differently and then just switch back and forth in between them. Or you could even do something like a takeoff, cruise, you know, air-to-air, air-to-ground, landing mode, and then have the different things on there. But honestly, there's so many buttons and so many options that I haven't really found it necessary to do anything like that, so I haven't even looked into it. So right now all it does is change different colors. And I'm not going to plug them in to show the colors. Obviously the Warthog has green backlighting, and this has 5 colors. It's like red, green, blue, a white-ish, and a purple, if I remember right, by default. But in the software, you can actually, it's infinite. You can just put in whatever RGB setup you want on it. This flap lever here works basically the same as the friction rotary here, with the exception that this one has a middle detent on the Warthog, and this one has no detent. It's constant the whole range. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the functionality on the Hog throttles as well. Pretty standard. Compare that to the Virpil. You see that? Yeah. And you can see that there's a lot more stuff going on. You got a lot more options. First of all, probably the most important thing is the slew sensor is a mini stick. It's not a stupid little nub, and I think it's just an Xbox mini stick. It works great, feels great. It's basically perfect. I really like that, and of course it's got a push as well. I do have the mod for the Warthog slew sensor, which is awesome, excellent. This is still even better than that, because the texture on the outside is actually a little bit of a rubbery feel, so it's a lot easier and smoother motion and everything too. This is really good on the Warthog, so if you have a Hog and you want to go this route, I highly recommend that too. Real easy to install and everything. Some other guys have it too, you can talk to them about it, but yeah, it's real good. But they did an excellent job on this. 2 other really notable features on the VPC that the Hog doesn't have is you've got an analog axis here with a middle detent, and you've got a constant rotary encoder here. So obviously this works kind of like the ones down here at the base do, but obviously this is more meant for, you know, like a radar usage operation kind of thing, either range or, you know, azimuth or elevation or whatever. But I've always been I never used the axis on the Hog for zoom, because I think it's kind of silly to have to take your hand off of the HOTAS to zoom in or out. So I just used a modifier and a button to go in and out on the stick. But on this one I don't even have to, because this slider right here with the detent is just like perfectly made for that. It works real nice. But of course you could also make this some other thing like elevation or whatever you wanted. Lots of options. So this is a 3-way, up, down, push. This is a 5-way. You've got another 5-way over here, 5-way here, 5-way here, and then 2 buttons. And then on the back side you got your 2-way toggle. This one will not, I haven't gotten into the software to try to make it that way, but as opposed to the Hog where you've got it's on in each position and the middle position is recognized as well, this one spring loads back to the middle and it's not a constant on. Now this thing, they give you this as another option, because when this ships it doesn't have this attached, it doesn't have this toggle attached, just for shipping so it doesn't break off, I'm assuming. But they give you this one, and you can choose whichever one you want to install. This one is a 2-way constant on. Let me see if you can. So it just, you know, like that. So basically you can set it up for however you want it, which is nice. It's nice that they added that in. Other notable differences, the Hog has the idle cutoff detents, and it also has afterburner detent, obviously, that you can have in or out. This has no detents at all. In this version, the new version, for whatever reason, they removed the detent for afterburner. I think they had it in on the original version, but they do not on this one. They took it out. Now another thing they took out was the latch that connects the throttles together. In the other versions, it was actually a switch as well, so that the software knew when it was latched together and that switch was closed, it knew that basically to treat them both as one. So if there was any slight differences in them, it would only take the reading from one and then apply it to both of them, which is nice, so you don't have asymmetric thrust issues. Because when you have this connected, you can see there's a little bit of play in between them. Now, in the software, it does a pretty good job of correcting for that. They had an issue at first, but they updated the firmware or the software or something, I don't know. And it does a lot better now. I haven't had any issue with it whatsoever, but that's just something to note. This latch is no longer an actual switch, and it does not have the detent. What you can do though, because the software is good, you can set it up basically however you want. So I have it where if I want the idle cutoff, I've got a range of, like, I forget what I set it to, but there's a very small range at the very beginning of travel that acts as that, as long as I have a modifier down. So if I want to put it into the idle cutoff, just put down the button, move it a tiny bit, let go, and then when you bring it back, it's not going to go back into the idle cutoff. It won't shut your engines off. It'll just come back to idle. Likewise, you can set up modes where in one setup, it will only go to, say, like 80% of the throw, you know, virtually, because the throttles will still go the whole distance, but it will only recognize 80% of it. And then you hit a button, and it'll go all the way. So you can kind of use that as your afterburner detent. And for me, it's this button right here that I have on the front. So normally, all the way forward, it's going to take me up to mil. And then if I hit that button, then I'm already automatically at full afterburner. And I can still use it with that and just manually leave it in mil, wherever that is. But if I'm in afterburner and I want to go direct to mil like that, I can just hit the button again, and then it's only reading 80%, so it knows that it's only at, you know, military power. So it's nice. So it doesn't have the physical bumps and stuff that this does, the detent and the you know, finger lifts and stuff, but you can get around that with software. So that's just something that it's just, basically an afterburner detent should not stop you from considering this, because it's not that big a deal. Aside from that, I don't know if there's really anything to mention. Construction quality is good on both of them. One thing I will say is that the switches, the toggles on the Warthog feel much nicer. And they're much higher quality switches. See if I can do this without getting my finger in the way. As opposed to these. So you can tell a little bit by the sound what I'm talking about. It's much more distinct and aggressive on the Warthog, which is nice, but the downside to that as well is that it's a lot louder, you know. I don't even know if it's worth mentioning, but it just feels a little bit different. These are high quality switches too, toggles, and I have no doubt that they'll last for, you know, millions of activations or whatever it is. They just feel a little bit different. They're a little bit smaller too, just in size. Aside from that, the buttons are fine. I wouldn't call them, you know, spectacular or anything. I wouldn't put it on that guy's channel that does reviews of rotary knobs, but it works. No, they're fine. I don't have any complaints. They do have that kind of, they move around just a little bit. Let me see if I can stop blocking the camera. Yeah, they got a little bit of that kind of slop thing going on, like I was talking about the VKB stick. Kind of that same thing, not as bad, but a little bit of that going on. Not much travel, not much throw when you push it, but they're very clicky, very distinct. They're good, good buttons. So yeah, that pretty much does it. I will say that with all the functionality on these two throttle handles, it doesn't, like you can't really get a good, you know, manhandle on it because you're activating the buttons and stuff. So you kind of have to only use this part of your hand as opposed to grapping and like that, which you can kind of do on the Warthog a little bit, but that's because there's less buttons and stuff on the Hog. So, but just thought I'd mention it. It's real comfortable in the hand still, and no issues actually reaching anything, any of the buttons. So they did a pretty good job with it. There's really not much I would change about it. All right, I guess I'll take you over to the computer and can look at software. Okay, so now down to everybody's favorite part, the software. Basically, both programs are very powerful, and they'll let you do a lot of stuff. You can configure the hell out of the joysticks, which is good, as opposed to like the Thrustmaster. You can do some stuff in Target, but it's not really super user-friendly, and you are limited still on a lot of things. The other two offerings, VKB and Virpil, you can really change almost everything about the stick. And like I said, that's a really good thing. What I'll say, after dealing with VKB's software and Virpil software, Virpil's is way better. Because the problem you're going to run into if you get one of these is that these are not, English-speaking countries by default. So it seems like some of the technical jargon, which is or can be hard to follow in and of itself, because it was written by an engineer, maybe doesn't translate over 100% to English as well. So I found it very difficult when I was using the Gunfighter stick, trying to understand the software to try to get the mini sticks to behave differently from what they were doing. It was very frustrating, and I talked to Grits as well about it, because we were both trying to do the same thing, and he wasn't having much luck with it either. So that said, I'm not going to reinstall the software for VKB. You can look for videos to actually see what it looks like and everything, but we will just take a brief dive into their user manual so that you can get a kind of sense of what I'm talking about. Let's go to a, random page. Okay, so here's a random page with a lot of technical jargon on it that kind of gives you a feel for what's in the software itself. You'll get a big, GUI, and it'll just have this kind of stuff just laid out in a random order in front of you with checkboxes and stuff like that, and pull downs and percentages you can type in and all that kind of stuff. This gives you an idea of the stuff. It's, you'll see something and be like, what is that? And you come in and look, okay, BND bonding controls, getting relative access response into a loop. Okay, well, what exactly does that mean? I need to go in and I need to test it, and I need to, then it doesn't work as like I'm expecting it to. It might reference you back to other parts of the manual that reference you to other parts of the manual. It's very, engineerdy type of stuff. I don't consider myself completely stupid. I usually do fine with technical things, and I found this just a chore. It was just not pleasant at all. Trying to figure out how to do relatively simple things seemed like an impossible task sometimes. So that's something to note. I really did not enjoy their software. That said, it gives you like basically every access to anything you could ever want, probably. So if you're in the know, then you could probably do a whole lot of stuff with it, which is nice. To compare it with the Virpil, we'll go over here, and I don't know, as I'm scrolling through, you can see it's kind of laid out simpler, easier to follow for me at least. Things are pretty logical. However, you'll also notice that it's not nearly as long or in depth. So there are going to be things within the software that are not covered here, and you're going to be left scratching your head, like, what the heck is this? How do I work it? Yada, yada, yada. There is a guy that's making tutorials for Virpil's software, though, which is a very big help. And I'll put a link down to his channel below, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it. I think there's a guy that's doing tutorials for the VKB, but it's all in German, so, you take that for whatever it's worth. But I do enjoy the Virpil software much better. And let's fire it up. Well, it's not going to show anything right at this second because I don't have the stick plugged in. But this is what it looks like. Once you get in here and spend about 5 minutes with it, you'll understand basically the gist of these different pages and what you can do with them. It's real simple. You load your device in. Basically, this load VP device basically just means it's going to read whatever was saved onto the PCB on the stick itself into the software so that it knows where all your settings are. And then if you go in and you change any settings, you go save to the VPC device, which just downloads it back into the stick itself. So you don't have to have the software running for the stick to act like you want. All that information is stored on board the device itself. So yeah, so this is not bad at all. It's real powerful. Lets you do a lot of things. And overall, it's pretty good. All right, guys. Well, to sum it all up, I'm real happy with the VPC Mongoose T50 CM2. Say that 5 times fast. I like it a lot. The improvements they made make it almost perfect in my eyes. If they could fix the quality of the plastic levers and maybe give a little bit more space for the hand, it would be pretty much perfect. As far as functionality goes, between the three, it's definitely the best. It gives you the most options. It's the most ergonomic. As long as you don't mind the additional height and the mounting solution that you're going to have, then I'd say I'd highly recommend it. But as far as that goes, I mean, any of these sticks is really good. If the VKB didn't have the mini stick for the hat, then I wouldn't have even considered going with the VPC. It's a really great stick. You just need to know about that. And if you're comfortable with it, then you'll be happy with the stick. As far as the feel of the mechanism, the VKB is actually the nicest. It's just real smooth throughout the entire length of throw in any direction. Second place would be the VPC. And then, of course, third would be the Warthog. As far as the throttles go, the Virpil offering just blows the hog out of the water. You just need to know that you're not going to have idle cutoff detents or afterburner detent physically. You're going to have to try to do that through the software. But if that's not an issue to you that you can get over, then I highly recommend that. That's almost a no-brainer. So anyway, if you guys have any questions, let me know and I will get back and try to answer them. I just thought the video would be an easier format than making an essay on the website. So I will catch you guys later. What do you think, buddy? I agree with that.